عن جديد بالمؤتمر بحضوركم كمان معنا ل Women on the Front Lines 2015. من رواد الإعلام الأمريكي والعالمي السيد جيم كلانسي، صحافي ومراسل سابق بمحطة CNN العالمية، وبتحاوره السيدة حنين غدار رئيسة تحرير موقع ناو لبنان. تفضلوا.
Facing the Brandenburg Gate, and you could see it as the rain began to fall. These crowds of people just showed up long before the speeches began by the politicians. They walked past them. They walked into West Berlin. They were climbing up our live shot position. We had built this, and it was shaking, and the camera was shaking as we were trying to cover it. We were trying to plead with them, don't climb up here, but you couldn't stop it. You couldn't stop it.
There's no greater privilege or responsibility than being an eyewitness to the history of our world. Rarely, journalists who cover political revolution and conflicts can also claim to have been a part of a revolution of a different kind, a revolution in how information is both gathered and in a matter of moments delivered around the world. 34 years as a correspondent and news anchor at CNN made Jim Clancy a part of that revolution. The 24-hour non-stop delivery of news by satellite. There were historic figures whose words and deeds, for better or worse, were lifted onto that global stage. Some of them arguably changed the future of not only their own citizens, but all of us. Just as significant, the ability to share the inspiration and the importance of the common man, no matter how big, no matter how small.
The two small tents, one packed with toys, were suitable for backyard camping, but the front patio is all the Yassine family could clear. Ali wears a nice welt under one eye from a misstep in the rubble, but 5-year-old Mehdi is unfazed, eager to try out his English and tour guide skills on TV. First stop, of course, the bomb craters.
Here two. One here, and one there. If you want, come see the house. Come to my room.
Mehdi's main attraction, his room, of course. It's on the top floor and requires climbing over shattered doors and furniture. By the time we reach the roof, there's a chance to pause and ponder.
What happened? Look what happened.
Mehdi's words really sum up a journalist's job. Tell the world what happened, show them, help them understand why they should care.
Hello, everyone. I'm very, very honored to be moderating this panel and interviewing Mr. Jim Clancy. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Haneen, it's a pleasure to be here. I really am happy that I'm here. And I thank May Chidiak for extending me the invitation. Nothing made me happier than that invitation to be here with all of you. I mean that. It's good to be with you too, Haneen.
Thank you.
I paid her. She's going to ask me easy questions.
Okay, let's start with the documentary that we just saw. The little boy, Mehdi, who was showing you around in the South. We were talking about this earlier, and this guy was telling you the story. He was acting like you're a fixer journalist. And when it comes to war reporting and conflict reporting, what's the role of these people? Like, how is it, you, as your sources, the people like Mehdi, how can you describe them? Can you tell us more about them?
They're characters. Everything that you do in journalism is a story. We're storytellers. And when you have someone like this young man, he's a poignant storyteller. He understands what happened to his house, and he wants you to understand what happened as well. He may not understand the politics behind it, but more than anyone else, perhaps he understands the reality of it. And this is what you try to convey in a story. We were talking about conflict zones today. In neighboring Syria, if it weren't for the freelancers, kids that picked up cameras and risked their lives to bring us the story, we wouldn't know really what was going on inside Syria. We know what the fate of all too many professional journalists have been, or freelance journalists have been, who tried to go in to try to apply their skills. It's been a very ugly time, a very difficult time for journalism and for journalists. And, you know, I think of people like Marie Colvin, my good friend, who covered Lebanon, who covered Israel and the occupied territories, who covered Syria and lost her life there 3 years ago, just a couple of weeks ago. When you stop and think about those people and the sacrifices that they have made and they are making today, it's got to give purpose to your job. It's got to cause you to rededicate what you are doing with your life.
So why does it matter to you when war and conflict, covering war and conflict? So why does it matter to you as an international correspondent?
You know, I should start at the beginning, and the beginning is here, really it is, because while I had gone to cover the Malvinas-Falklands War in early 1982 in Argentina, it was coming to Beirut in the summer of 1982 that really changed me, and it was the Lebanese people and their resilience in the face of conflict that really gave me purpose and cause to say they're worth the risk. I was a national correspondent. I was one of the first national correspondents at CNN, which meant that I covered the United States. And when I returned from Lebanon, I was offered a job that would lead to the White House, and it was covering the elections that were coming up. And the alternative was to go back to Beirut. Nobody wanted to go to Beirut. It took me less than 1 minute to tell them I was coming back to Beirut. And I've never regretted it. You know, conflict is a terrible thing. It brings out the worst in people. There's no doubt about it. We're watching some of that unfold on the nightly news. But I can tell you it also brings out the best in people. Real heroism, real sacrifice for others, real sacrifice for the innocent victims who are caught in the crossfire. You meet some incredible, incredible people.
It seems Beirut was very special to you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Beirut is very charming, and we do have this love-hate relationship with Lebanon and Beirut, and I'm sure a lot of people who live here for a while do have the same feeling. But when covering the news in Lebanon, if you want to name one challenge while we're covering Lebanon, what would that be?
Oh, you should have given me a hint about this one. I should have thought of a really good story, you know. Been arrested a few times. Have had to face down some difficulties a few times. And of course we had, you know, the threat of kidnappings back in the mid-1980s that really forced CNN to close down its operations here. And it was non-stop challenges.
The personal safety part, basically.
I think that, you know, one of the stories that stands out in my mind is what happened with the PLO when Arafat had re-entered in Tripoli, and they were holding a group of Israeli soldiers hostage, trying to exchange them. And in fact, one day there was just a battle. The entire seafront in Tripoli was alight, shells hitting in the harbor. The Syrians and the Libyans were trying to sink a Red Cross ship that was going to exchange those Israeli prisoners for thousands of Palestinians held in Israeli jails and also in South Lebanon. Thousands and thousands of them. And it was really Arafat's only great victory on the battlefield that he was able to pull it off. But one of the incredible things about it that was never published was that they had the prisoners down in the southern suburbs or down in Beirut, and they had to transport them to Tripoli, and they had no vehicles. They literally hitchhiked with those Israeli prisoners to Tripoli to exchange them. And the Israelis were so afraid, they didn't want to be turned over. They didn't want to go out in the small fishing boats to get to the Red Cross ship because there was so much shell fire. I mean, it was unforgettable. And Arafat turned the whole Middle East on its head. As you recall, Egypt was out of the Arab fold. It had been expelled because of the peace treaty at Camp David. Arafat went to Port Said in Egypt, got off the ship out of Tripoli, and embraced Mubarak, and suddenly Egypt was back in the fold. Arafat came out a winner. I mean, he really turned things on their heads, and it started hitchhiking on their way up from Beirut.
Yeah, that's, I can see the, why you came back to Beirut and why Beirut is so special.
Non-stop excitement.
Because we were talking before about like when it comes to the US and the US media and US covers and the controversies, like the big news in the US is mostly about like, if you want to talk more about it, it's like the recent controversy in the U.S. media on the Brian Williams O'Reillys. This is one of the big.
We've had a number.
You had big news on Brian Williams.
We've had a number of controversies. Brian Williams, one of the anchormen for NBC, was called out by U.S. servicemen when he claimed that he was aboard a helicopter in Iraq that was fired upon by a rocket-propelled grenade. And members of the crew said, "Sorry, you weren't on that helicopter. We were. You were on a helicopter an hour later." And he's had to step down. He's been suspended for 6 months, and many people wonder if he'll ever be back. Then on the other hand, we've got Bill O'Reilly, who told a series of stories. One, that he was in El Salvador when a group of nuns were killed, and his colleagues have said he didn't arrive for almost a year later. And then he had the story of in front of the Casa Rosada in Argentina during the Malvinas Falklands War, which I did cover. I was at the same demonstration, and when they finally showed the video, I could see that his camera position, that he must have been standing about 6 or 8 feet to my left. He's claimed that people were shot down and killed. And when he was challenged on that, he said, "No, I saw it. It was absolutely there." Well, I was there, and it didn't happen. All right? But Bill O'Reilly is going to keep his job because he's a talk host. He's a personality host. And I guess that part of journalism doesn't apply. But he's going to keep his job, as one of the pundits put it, unless it is proven that Bill O'Reilly personally shot those nuns in El Salvador. He keeps his job.
All right, speaking of controversies, I'm sure everyone here is eager to hear your take on your own Twitter controversy that led to your resignation from CNN. So,
Haneen, I don't know what you're talking about.
I think everybody will be asking the same question.
I am going to be teaching a
say.
workshop at Lebanese American University on Friday. I'll be doing the course on social media, Twitter, to be correct. Really overblown, I'm over it. But the reality is, I don't like trolls. And when an individual approached me saying, "You want me to tell you why you're wrong?" There was a Charlie Hebdo tweet, but it had nothing to do with Charlie Hebdo. The Charlie Hebdo tweet was sent out hours earlier. It had 650 retweets. Whether it was politically correct or not, I don't really care. It was a tweet. It was not my doctoral thesis. But this individual had harangued me back in July and really produced what we call Hasbara trolls that are part of a paid, funded, operation, just to descend on me with insults and smears and everything else. I didn't want a repeat of it, and so I blocked him, and I used the word Hasbara, which touched it all off all over again. But, I don't think anybody here expects me to put up with that. I mean, propagandists telling you you can't have an opinion, or if they disagree with your opinion, they don't want to argue with you, they want to stop the discussion. That's what they want to do. And all too often today, for journalists, you're subjected to this. And it's not only by these Hasbara trolls. I mean, there are Islamists that do the same thing. There are people of all political persuasions that get involved in what we call trolling out on social media, causing problems for people. And I think it's worth noting that women, and there's many women journalists here can tell you, it is far worse for them than it is for those of us who are men and journalists as well. Women, the insults that are given to women, and you wouldn't even want to repeat them. And they just try to harass people out of the public forum where ideas can be discussed. And what's really ironic about this one particular individual was that his boss was featured on my show once a week for almost 2 years. It's not the ideas. He has had conservative ideas. That's not the problem. The problem is getting trolled. And I don't think the internet, you know, anonymous accounts, I don't think the internet needs it. Certainly, it's not good for the discussion of any topic.
So the best advice you have for people, women or other journalists who get trolled, is to ignore it? Or how do you put up with this?
You don't put up with it. You make a complaint. You file a complaint to Twitter, but you record that tweet. I made a mistake, I must say, of deleting the tweets. And when the account was told, not a single one of these hateful tweets, and there were, I guess, 100, more than 100, they weren't there. They weren't even represented. So I would suggest that you save it. Don't block the people until you have a chance to, you know, get it all down.
Everything.
And then you can systematically go through it and file a complaint. The complaints don't do a lot of good because a lot of these accounts are set up, they only have 3 followers.
Doesn't matter.
That might be the individual. They might be running 10 accounts. They're anonymous, they're not using their real names, but it's a problem. Only when they demand that everybody use their real name. I tweet under my real name, you know, and I'll take the heat for anything that I say.
But the repercussions of that were very harsh on your profession, in the sense. Can you?
You know,
It led to your resignation.
the decision was made I would leave CNN.
Okay.
And we've got a legal agreement where CNN speaks for CNN and I don't anymore, which is understandable. And I'm perfectly fine with that. What I really want to stress, I think, is all the support that I got from the American Jewish community, as well as my friends in Israel. Got tons of support from them. And today, you know, I look back on my 34 years with CNN and with nothing but happiness. CNN has been wonderful to me and to my family. It's been a journey. I'm still great friends with so many of my colleagues, still working for CNN. I embrace change. And I'm 66 years old this month. I mean, yeah. I know I look a lot younger, I know. But I want to do photography. I want to do some other things. And still remain very interested in journalism, talking to young journalists.
So any specific plans?
Well, you know,
in the near future?
I'm working with the international.
Are you moving to another institution? Are you thinking of keep on doing journalism in the same way, or different kind of from different perspective?
I don't want to go back and do daily deadlines. You know, I've had a lot of people coming up to me saying, "Oh, basically what they were proposing, they wanted a 50-part series looking at the 50 states of the United States." And I said, "Do you realize that's 3 years of deadlines?" You know, I can't think. It's 50 term papers. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do the deadlines. I want to take photographs. I want to tell people's stories. I work closely with the International Press Institute. I'll be there in Yangon, Myanmar at the end of the month, and talking with officials there about their road to freedom and how journalism plays a role in it. Be talking a lot about the defamation laws, where you have Erdogan. He wants to put a 12-year-old blogger in jail. Why? Because he insulted the president, President Erdogan. This is what you call criminal defamation. You say something about me I don't like, I can sue you and put you in prison. You know, you can't have a free country without a free press, and you can't have a free press if you tell them that they can't criticize government leaders. They got to be able to do that.
I have one last question before we start taking questions from the audience. When we're talking about the role of the journalist, it's changing because the format and the shape of content is changing. So we have print, which is kind of dying in many parts of the world in front of the online media. We have the TV, which we're saying also it's going to move into more of an internet TV. So journalism changing, the content maybe is still the same, maybe, we don't know, but the channels are completely different and it's moving and changing very fast. So is the role of a journalist changing with that? And how do you describe the role of journalists? Is it the still old-fashioned, traditional description of a journalist? Is online media the future? And what is online media? Is everything online media? So can we talk more about that?
It's both an encouraging question and a troubling question. And there are really two answers, because there's the business model of journalism, which, believe me, is undergoing profound change. The amount of revenue that is going to print media is plummeting. It's just steadily going down every year. The amount that is going to television networks, CNN and the big broadcast networks, is also in sharp decline. At the same time, online advertising revenues are going up in a huge way. And so that spells a change in the business model of journalism. But some, I fear, are looking at it as saying, well, then that changes what journalism is all about. And you know, we talked about that whole Twitter thing. One of the most disappointing things was that some of the most inaccurate stories were written in the first couple of days, and it wasn't until the New York Times called me, and I was no longer making any comments. It was like 3-4 days later that Emily Steele called me. All of the people that were in the online media, they just made it up, whatever they wanted. They didn't drop a dime on anybody. There was no journalism that was involved there. They thought that they had the caveat to do whatever they wanted to because it was online, I guess. And if journalism goes down that route, there's not going to be anybody reading or watching anything because it won't be trustworthy at all. Now, obviously, journalists, serious journalists, are still going to be there. As I said at the outset, it's about storytelling. There is nothing more interesting than the truth. I've seen it a million times. The truth is always more interesting. I caution journalists that get into investigative reporting that if you end up with the same thing that you went in, say you thought you were going to find a government scandal in economics or something, and you went in with that belief, and when you came out, you proved that story and it was absolutely correct, throw your work out. It's no good. It's not possible to investigate something and learn nothing. So journalists have to continue to investigate. And investigative journalism is redundant. All journalism should be, investigating, listening to young Mahdi tell his side of the story of what happened to his house. You have to listen to people, and you have to share their story, and you have to be fair to other people. And I'm afraid some people in online media think that, no, it's just about my opinion. I go out there and I write whatever I want, or I say whatever I want, and it's entertaining, and people click on it, and so that it works.
And they like it.
Yeah, well, and the media companies, the major media companies, what they're doing is they're looking at how many times you click on a story, and then that's the story they'll cover. So they're looking at what's going on online, and they use that for feedback to go into then what's going to be shown in the broadcast. This is how Kim Kardashian is so popular. I know. I tell you, in all my years, I never put Kim Kardashian, anything about her, in any show. I mean, what was the point? But that's the kind of a thing. I don't even care much for celebrity news, but if people do, that's fine. I should get off my high horse. We should let them ask some questions, huh?
I think so, yeah. All right, we're going to start having questions. I don't know how much, do we still have time? 5 minutes? We'll take 10 minutes. Okay. Yes, please.
We'll make them short.
Hi, Jim. Thank you for coming to Lebanon. I have a question. You know that I wrote a book called Soup for Syria, and I've had a lot of criticism from Lebanese people because I'm helping Syrian refugees. I'd like to know how I could do to create a sort of empathy towards this cause, because I'm having a lot of trouble. Lots of people are telling me that you should be helping Lebanese. You can't hear me? I should stand up? Okay, sorry.
Okay, so
empathy.
you've written the
how
book.
to get empathy
Yeah.
from people, because I'm sick and tired of hearing people telling me, why are you helping Syrian refugees and Syrian families? You should be helping Lebanese families. But
specifically, and I know the book well, and it's a beautiful book, and you reach out and you try to help someone. Naturally, there's competition for resources, and that causes conflict sometimes in terms of people's opinion about where resources ought to go. But there's no reason to be critical of this book, because this is a book that could be applied, you know, to anyone, anywhere, in any kitchen. I'm not an expert in you know, empathy. I mean, obviously, news coverage and news stories are one of the things that, you know, can cast a light on all of that. But in terms of corporate or, you know, activism in that way, I'm no expert. I'd be wrong to try to give you advice. I really would. But it's a good book. Everybody should buy it.
Can I ask you please to state your name and profession before you ask your question, because it will help us understand the context better. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Hi, Nora Bustani. I teach journalism at the American University of Beirut, and I used to work as a journalist as well. My question to Jim is, what's your best advice from your vantage point, your rich experience, to young students who want to become journalists? What's your best advice to them?
Nora Bustani of the New York Times. I'm honored to have your question.
Washington Post.
Uh-oh. The best advice, you know, people come and they're worried about what they're going to wear. They're worried about, am I too heavy? Am I too thin? Should I be in television? Should I be in radio? All of these kinds of things. Forget all of that. All you need is a story. Get a story. People say, well, I'm in Lebanon and there's no story to tell. What? You know, there's nothing. This place has more stories that need to be told. And don't, you know, one of the hazards of what I talked about the decline of print is that I fear that the online journalists at the end of the day, if the newspapers go out of business, where will they steal their stories? They'll have nothing to write about because they don't go out and get it themselves. The stories are in your neighborhoods. The stories are gained by talking to people, having contact with them, working sources, and being ready to, you know, to work. This isn't an 8-hour-a-day job.
Please.
Hello, my name is Tatiana Skaf. I work with UNESCO on a youth empowerment project. First of all, I would love to tell you that we're very happy to have you here. And it's really so touching to see someone loving Beirut as much as you do. Especially that, unfortunately, a lot of Lebanese people are not loving it as much anymore. My question would be, it was so very touching, the word storytelling, because unfortunately, I have to admit that in Lebanon, the journalists are not storytellers anymore. We are living in a polarized society where the journalist became a political analyst, not a journalist anymore. We are polarized, and this is why I would love to know if you think it's a good idea to have this polarization in the journalist field as a whole. Is it healthy, like to reflect political opinions, or does it kill the journalism in general? Thank you.
Political polarization is bad. It's a good question. And it's not only here in Lebanon, it's in my own country, in the United States. We're more polarized than at any time I can remember in my lifetime.
Yesterday, especially.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's just, when you look at it, you move away from political polarization to tell the stories about people, ordinary people, and look to balance the story. You know, if you tend to lean towards one political spectrum, make a conscious effort to move to the other. You know, look into the fundamentals of storytelling and journalism, to try to tell a story that's going to resonate with all Lebanese, with all parents, with all mothers and fathers. Something that reaches out to people and tell that story. You know, one of the problems we have in journalism today is, you know, we call it, in other parts of the world, it's called brown bag journalism, where you're paid to do reporting on a particular politician, favorable reporting. It's nothing but propaganda. Don't get in the propaganda business. Journalism is so much richer, and as I said, there's nothing more interesting than the truth. Nothing.
I think to rephrase this question also, I would like to hear your opinion on, if I may ask this question, does objectivity in journalism means that you also have to be neutral, or does objectivity also mean that you can have an opinion?
You know, objectivity is a wonderful thing until you stare a genocide in the face. You know, you can talk about all of that. Objectivity is a wonderful thing until you realize who is behind a car bombing. And it's your responsibility to stand up, to take a position. It's not your responsibility to say, well, who knows? You know, you have to stand up. That's part of being a journalist. Don't everybody stand up all the time. BB got all the standing ovations.
Thank you. That was exactly what I wanted to hear.
That was kind of disappointing to me yesterday to see that number of standing ovations. I think some of the ideas that were represented here, and we had a nice discussion about this. Rikita Durgam was here to talk about it. How, you know, I look at it and I see this is really about regional dominance between Israel and Iran. But having said that, if Iran moves forward with its regional dominance, the consequences for Lebanon are real and they are very serious. And sometimes I think that U.S. politicians and the body politic and a lot of U.S. journalists forget that. This is the only democracy in the Middle East.
Wow. I think we can have one last question. 2 questions. Do we have time for 2 questions? Okay. Quick questions. If it's very quick, no comment, just a question.
Marguerite Saloum, working on my master's degree as journalism and communication. My question is, if you were a Lebanese journalist, what is your story, your first story?
If I what?
If you were a Lebanese journalist, what would be your first story?
Ooh, not really very difficult. I would be talking about the impact of Syrian refugees on Lebanese life. I would be talking about the costs. I would be talking about the quality of those people's lives and how it's impacting the Lebanese. And you know what? I could spend a year reporting on that with a different story every couple of days.
Mushira, please, and then you, Joël, for the last question. So Mushira and then Joël, and that's it.
Thank you very much. How do we bridge the gap between the aspiration of the people in the region and the Western media? There is a big gap. The perception of the Western media is a bit different than the perception of the people in the region of what they want to make. Especially vis-a-vis the Islamists, political Islam.
It's been a very difficult thing for Western journalists to figure out this thing called Islam and political Islam, and to understand and be accountable for having driven political discussion out of the public square and into the mosque in the first place. Is ISIS about Islam, or is Daesh really about power? It has been written recently that as we try to put ISIS on the couch, I say, putting it on the couch, everybody's trying to psychoanalyze them. Gee, what's wrong with these kids? I don't know. People want power. People are frustrated. But what they're doing, there's not a civilized human being on the planet that supports any of this. But a closer look at who is supporting it and where the funding is coming from and where the supplies are coming from and how this chaos plays into the hands of other people. Because Lord knows, with all this chaos, we don't want any regime change, do we? You know, we don't, everybody, when you look at it, you just say, wow. Let me tell you, when al-Sisi took over again, the military took over again, basically returning Egypt to military rule, the biggest sigh wasn't from the barracks in Egypt. I think it came from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. I mean, a sigh of relief that the pattern of the overthrow, the political upheaval was going to be turned back. The Arab Spring hasn't been anything like we all wanted. Hasn't been anything. It's made us think a lot, but it's been its own tragedy. You know, as we look at the suffering in neighboring Syria, the suffering in Iraq that all began with the U.S. Invasion, the suffering that's been, you know, sent right in waves across the Middle East. It's not very encouraging. We haven't gotten it right.
Thank you. Joël? Hello, my name is Joël Bahlo. I always wondered regarding the Arab Spring. It started in Tunisia, then it spread out. Maybe it's the online war or discussions that encouraged it. And yet I look at Lebanon, where we have a great freedom of speech and journalism, and yet we're not any close to democracy, to real one. And I always wonder why. We are very educated people, we are open, we are a great diversity, we are rich history, and with this diversity, and yet we should be the first Arab country to be a role model for democracy. And I always wondered why. I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
It's, you know, I pondered the same question. Obviously, Lebanon is a small nation that for years thought that by being weak militarily, that would be its protection, and it proved not to be the case. It has been looked at from many different perspectives as a lack of leadership, too much dependence on what we'll call like royal republics, where families, one succeeds the other. They are well known, and they continue on in office, and a lack of developing new leadership and encouraging new leadership and new ideas. Too many fixes that are in terms of, you know, very famously, you all know the cell phone business here. Everybody knew whoever was going to get the franchises was a license to print money, and it was just a matter of deciding who would get them. That's what held it up for years. And I look at the United States today, and we might be back down to another Bush and another Clinton, and we're in the Royal Republic realm as well, because the political strategists know that if you have a familiar name, that's going to help you to win the election at all costs, and the cost is real democracy. Lebanon has a lot of soul searching to do. I can't do it for you. I wish I had an easy answer. I don't. I wish I did. But I still think the fundamentals are here, because I think you do have a free press.
Please, just a last question to go back to the title of our conference, Women on the Front Lines. So as a journalist, you're now 64 or 66, you told us. You spent 34 years at CNN, if I'm not wrong. The biggest competition was coming from men or from women journalists, because now mostly we hear about big stars, and mainly they are women on TV. What can you say about that? Am I wrong? Am I right? I don't know.
You're right. No, May, you're right, of course. We've seen a great rise of the role of women in the media, certainly on camera. Christiane Amanpour on CNN, and she got there covering conflict. And, you know, as a male journalist, a lot of times you're asking yourself, well, look, I'm covering the same war. I'm taking the same risks, but she's getting all the media because she's a woman. I actually had one of the first women cameramen, one of the first women cameramen, you know, because that's the way it was done. But right here in Lebanon, Jane Evans. And Jane retired from CNN some years back, having worked in London and all over. But she sent me a message here today to say hello to all of you, and she wishes she were here. But lifting women up on the basis of what they do, not who they are. They're pulling the weight. Somebody came up to me before this panel and they said, you know, you're a guy on this panel, but you never really address specific women's issues in a special way during your 34 years at CNN. And I just said, but I covered all issues, and they're half of all of them. And it's really true. if we keep thinking that women can only be involved in women's issues, you're not getting where this conference wants you to go. I saw that this morning, and I thank you so much, May, for inviting me to share in this. What a great experience. What a great inspiration you have been to me all of my career. To you.
I think we don't have time for more questions.
Yeah, see the woman
She's
waving her hands in the back.
with, like,
we're way
all
over.
her
No, listen, we're
arms.
going to take time away from somebody else. We need to get out of here.
Yes, exactly. So I just want to thank you so much for a great, great panel, very inspiring. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your great questions. And that's
Haneen,
it.
thank you. Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure listening to you.
For those who would like to listen more to our dear Jim Clancy, they can join us at LAU Beirut on Friday at 3:30, and we are having a kind of workshop for 2.5 hours from 3:30 till 6. So all those who are interested can register their names and join us there. Thank you.